Hey everybody, we're here to go ahead and do a follow-up on this Nokia 929-930. We're going to go ahead and do a glass-only replacement on this phone. You can see here's the back side of it where it's been removed from the device. You can see it's obviously got a crack in it. We're going to use a couple of playing cards to help us get this glass off of the AMOLED here. And we'll need a heat source, so either a heat gun or I'll be using a hot air soldering iron. One thing that we also need to do is undo the touch function, the digitizer off of this display here. It's cooked onto the back of the AMOLED. So we're just going to pop up the little ribbon connector here. It's got usually a little bit of adhesive underneath it. You have to kind of wiggle it a little bit to get it free. Might take a second. This one's in there pretty good. It's not the end of the world if you break it, since you're going to be replacing with a new piece of glass that has this already anyways. There we go. Go ahead and just bend that forward. Alright, so we're ready to get started here. What we're going to need to do is basically heat up the display. I'm going to cover up just the portion down here that's cracked off where the AMOLED's actually showing. That way I don't get it too hot. The goal here is to get it nice and warm. You roughly want to keep it about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That will give the glue underneath the glass the heat it needs to melt, and you can separate it. You don't want to get too much hotter than 180 degrees Fahrenheit, as you could actually burn the AMOLED underneath it. Normally, if it's really warm to the touch, basically it feels like it might burn you a little bit. That's the heat that we're looking for. You can use an infrared thermometer if you need to as well. Those work pretty well in this particular scenario. So we're just going to move our heat gun around and get it nice and warm. And we'll take a playing card here and slide it just into the glass and see if we can't get it to start separating. Now, when you do this, you want to be fairly gentle. You don't want to be too rough with it. Just take your time inserting it in there and see if you can get it to start to separate. You'll see the glue kind of pull back away from the display. It must not be hot enough yet. And the one thing that I found out with this particular display is that compared to some of the other devices I've done, like the Samsung devices or an Apple device, this particular display seems to have a little bit thicker glue on it. It takes a little bit more heat to get it to separate. You need it to be nice and warm before it glues itself back down. So just keep that in mind. If you've done this a few times, this one's a little bit different. It's a little bit different type of glue. So try to use a little bit flatter edge here and get that started. This thing's being really tricky. We'll try a different corner here. See if that works for us. You can see the card starting to poke through there. Excellent. So now you can see the separation starting to happen. If you look really close, you can kind of see where you can see the glue separating from the display. Now, this is what you want to do. You want it to push back a little bit. I'm just going to switch up my cards there. Now you can see that I'm having a little bit tougher time than normal. You normally can just stick them in there and it'll basically separate the glass from the AMOLED pretty easy. This is a little bit trickier. The glue's a little bit thicker. So you may need to rock your card back and forth a little bit here to get it to separate. Now, one thing that you do want to make sure that you do is you want to get Now that actual little cable that we separated down here at the bottom, which I thought was actually for the digitizer, is actually for the buttons down here at the bottom. So don't worry about separating in between the digitizer and the display. You'll feel that it'll get a little bit stiffer and a little bit harder to actually start to separate. So you may need to give it a little bit more heat when it gets there. You don't want to push too far into it when you feel it start to kind of get a little bit colder. It doesn't want to separate as much. You'll end up cracking the AMOLED display on the device. So take your time as you do this. You may have to heat it up multiple times to get this done correctly. So I'm just going to heat up just a top portion since it seems to cool fairly quickly. Save myself some time. You can see how much easier it separates now when it's nice and warm again. Just work our way down in the middle now. So now let's feel it cool down and the glue's getting stiffer. So we're going to get it nice and warm. Alright, so we've got it nice and warm again. Basically just take your time. Now one of the tricks to doing this correctly, and really not destroying your AMOLED below, is to just have patience. It will take a bit of time to get this done. I mean, I've done this a lot on a lot of different displays, so it'll probably take me about, I would say about 20 minutes total to do the entire thing and test it at the end, make sure that it still functions correctly. It may take you longer than that, and that's okay. Just make sure you take your time and that you get it nice and warm. Don't force it. It should be a fairly easy process. So once you get that resistance, make sure you just heat it up again. That way you don't crack your AMOLED. I did this on a Nexus 4. I got a little bit impatient and I thought I could go just a little bit further without having to heat it up. Oh, I can just get a little bit more. And I ended up cracking the display back in there, a little bit more expensive. So it cost me a good $80 to replace. So just be aware of that. And just take your time and have a little bit of patience. Now, if you do have multiple cracks in your display, you can see that this one's just in the bottom corner. Every time you hit a crack, you may have to force your card a little bit harder underneath it to get the glass to separate off of the display. In that situation, what I do is I like to heat up the crack just a little bit. That way, when you put your card onto it, it's a little bit easier to start the separation process again. And it's just like kind of sticking it back in from the side. It does take a little bit of force to get it to basically separate itself from the crack, so just be aware of that. Alright, so now we've hit the bottom. You can see that we're pushing our card down, and you'll see that the Loca, or the glue underneath, will basically just separate itself away down here at the bottom of the screen. Once you hit this point, you can just basically open it like a book and pull it away. And here we have our display. Let's kind of get some of this glue residue out of here. We can go ahead and test it, make sure it's still going to function here real fast. But looking at the bottom of the screen, there was a little ribbon cable here for the buttons down here across the bottom. So if your new screen didn't come with that, you'll want to transfer that over. And to remove that, we're just going to go ahead and heat up this bottom portion of the glass here. Get it nice and warm, about the same temperature you were using to remove the glue. And then just take a spudger or a card or a pry tool of some sort and try to get it to pull up. Just run your card underneath it. Don't force it, you don't want to rip it. Go ahead and separate off for us. Perfect, just like that. Now before I go too much further, I just want to make sure that the display is going to turn back on. Normally if you crack it, it will not allow you to display a picture really. So we're just going to hook our battery back up to our main board here. Hook our display back on and just make sure you can see a picture on it. You want to make sure that you hook it on correctly, so kind of trying to figure out how it would go on if it was inside of the device. You don't want to put the connection on backwards. Bad things can happen. Find our power button here. Alright, there we go. We got our Nokia logo here. So we're just going to let it get full color. Normally where you get some issue is right on the corners. If you've forced your card in on the corner. Looks like all four corners are looking good. I don't see any pressure damage at all. So Not too big of a struggle to get this screen off, but this is the first step. The next step we'll go ahead and do is basically clean all the glue off of the display, and then we'll use our local glue to re-adhere it. Check in the description for the videos. If you found it helpful, go ahead and hit the like button.